Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the International Affairs Forum at Northwestern Michigan College. We're all convened here for the 32nd season of the International Affairs Forum. So thank you for joining us. We're so glad to have you with us, whether it's your first time with us or you've been supporting our educational work for years and years. Thank you very much for choosing to join us. My name is Alex Tank. I have the honor of serving as the director of IAF, and it has been a busy summer. How many people out there feel like it's been a very busy summer? Yeah, that's what we do up here. We do busy summers. Yeah, they're beautiful. But now we're into local summer, right? Did I say that out loud? I should be keeping that a secret. This part of the year is just so beautiful, and it's so beautiful to be back with all of you. This fall, we've been gearing up this summer for a busy fall, and I can tell you what we've been up to. We've been reconvening the NMC students and our IAF student leadership team. They're volunteering tonight. They're in the audience. That's been very enriching for everyone involved. We've been recruiting high school students and advisors for our academic World Quest competition in the spring. We've been searching for our World Affairs Council of America student scholar candidates, and those come from this area, folks who have gone on to undergrad work in international affairs. We're trying to find those students and help connect them with future opportunities through the World Affairs Councils of America. And we've been having some fun. We've been out at the Traverse City horse shows, and if you've bought tickets, you can select International Affairs Forum. That helps raise funds for this program. And we'll be back out there on September 21st to receive one of those big checks, which should be fun. So please join us September 21st. World-class equestrian displays, and it's just phenomenal sporting. Very pleased to announce tonight that the International Affairs Forum will host its inaugural gala event beside the bay at NMC's Haggerty Center. That's going to be on October 16th with featured speaker Peter Meyer, former congressman from Michigan's 3rd District. And we'll leave that code up there for you for a minute if you want to grab your phones and scan that code. That's where you can reserve tickets or sponsor a table. And we're very excited to have you join us for that special event. It's just coming on the calendar, and we hope that we'll see many, many of you there. So now, part of our tradition, let's take a moment to greet everyone joining us in Leland at the Old Art Building and our friends from the Zonta Club of Rogers City. And you can give them a wave or at the camera over there. Yeah. All right. And these folks, they're helping make IAF reachable across northern Michigan. They're expanding our impact, I will say very patriotically, from lake to shining lake. Yeah. So now I'm very pleased that we have Professor David Shambaugh with us again. He's a returning expert, and some of you may recall he was an integral expert to IAF's remarkable China conference organized by Karen Prochelle Siegel, and Jack Siegel, and Gene Jenneman, and so many others from IAF history. So we are thrilled to have Dr. Shambaugh with us again to discuss his new book, Breaking the Engagement, How China Won and Lost America. And you saw that copies are available there in the lobby from our independent book-selling partner, Brilliant Books. Now, before we get into the discussion, I'd like to thank our business community sponsors, business community members, Century LLC, Desmond Liggett Wealth Advisors, Higher Grounds Coffee Company, Rivard Tea and Wheatley Group, Nicolay Bank, and Paul M. Schmuckel. So a round of applause for those folks. And a very sincere thank you to all of our IAF members who are here tonight and supporting with annual gifts. You support this community educational asset, and you make it possible for us to serve our community with thought-provoking programs like this one and expert speakers exploring critical global issues. And that's where you give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. Okay, so this is my quick reminder to please silence your mobile devices, and I'll lay out how we'll run this evening's program. I'll be back up here for a Q&A period after Dr. Shambaugh's prepared remarks. And the Q&A option for everyone, in person or online, is to email your questions to iaf@nmc.edu. And that's the preferred method. For everyone online, you can submit questions via Zoom Q&A function at any point during the program. And the last method for our audience here in the auditorium, you can flag down one of our volunteers for a question card. And that's another way to do it. Now, I am very honored to introduce our distinguished speaker for this evening. David Shambaugh is one of the world's foremost authorities on contemporary China and America's relationship with China. He is the Gaston Siger Professor of Asian Studies, Political Science, and International Affairs at George Washington University's Elliott School, where he also founded and directs the China Policy Program. He serves additionally as a distinguished visiting fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution. Over his career, he's written 35 books and hundreds of articles that have shaped how scholars, policymakers, and the public understand China and its role in the world. His previous books, such as China Goes Global, have become essential references in the field. And I want to make a quick note. If you've seen the cover of this book, China Goes Global, it has all these little red Chinese flags sticking out of it. And I thought this is a remarkably prescient illustration because it looks exactly like a coronavirus. It's so ironic. I don't know how you did that. And now he is here with us tonight with his most recent book, Breaking the Engagement, offering a groundbreaking reassessment of America's relationship with China. We are honored to have him with us, so please give a warm International Affairs Forum welcome to Professor David Shambaugh.
Oh, my goodness. I just begin by thanking all of you for coming out this evening, both here in person and those watching online, sincerely. Thank you for making the effort and taking the time. And thank you, Alex, for that most generous introduction and the kind invitation to launch my new book here at the International Affairs Forum. And I just would like to note the importance of the International Affairs Forum. I didn't realize that this is your 32nd, did you say? 32nd season. Very impressive. I want to congratulate you and your predecessors on all the important work that you do to organize the forum and to invite speakers from around the country and the world here to Traverse City, cherry capital of the world. Every year. It's really very important. You know, the United States, needless to say, needs to be engaged deeply with the world, is deeply engaged with the world, but our citizens need to be engaged with the world and world affairs. So it's absolutely vital, I think, the role that the World Affairs Council generally across the country, but the different chapters, including IAF here in Traverse City, do to bring topics up for discussion and bring speakers to interact with local citizens. So I just wanted to congratulate you for that. Now, I do a lot of public speaking, both around this country and abroad, but in all sincerity, I have to say that there's no place or venue that means more to me than right here in Traverse City. So before I get into tonight's topic, please allow me to indulge me for a couple of minutes for some personal reflections that most of you don't know about me. So I consider myself a native son of Traverse City, as I've been coming here my entire life, mainly in the summers, occasionally in other seasons. And indeed, moreover, my family has ties dating back more than a century. My grandparents and my father first arrived by steamship from Chicago into the old Mission Harbor. And there are photographs available in various local publications of those steamships. And they would stay overnight at the old Mission Inn for a couple of nights before they crossed the peninsula to the West Bay, where they had bought property facing the West Bay and built their first cabin in 1911. It's a long time ago, folks. So my family traces its roots here to at least 1911. And that cabin is still standing. And believe it or not, it still does not have electricity. I don't know what that says, but so my immediate and extended family, and we have extended family basically on 2 miles of shoreline on the West Bay. I won't tell you exactly where because you may want to come out, but so we are here and have been here, and as a teenager, I've been here my whole life. As a teenager, I spent summers working in the cherry orchards, both by hand, picking cherries for the lugs, before the picker was introduced, the automated, mechanized picker, which came in around the summer of 1970-71. So I worked in the orchards there. I worked in the local cherry receiving stations. I was a busboy and a waiter at the Park Place Hotel. Might have, and you know, I've been frequenting different Traverse City establishments, such as Barden's Wonder Freeze, down the street, the greatest ice cream store on the planet. Sledder's Tavern, been having my hair cut at Robertson's Barber Shop on Union Street my entire life. So I consider myself a native. Hopefully you'll accept me. You who are real natives will accept me. Thank you. I should say one other anecdote. My parents, back in 1960, they lived outside of Chicago, but they bought this dilapidated mansion out on the old Mission Peninsula and decided to renovate it and start a restaurant in it. That was known as the Bowers Harbor Inn. True story, folks. No longer Bowers Harbor Inn, but anyway, I won't embellish that. About the ghost of Genevieve Stuckney and others. Anyway, so I have deep roots and local ties here to Traverse City. It means a great deal to me to be invited tonight to speak to you. Not the first time, as Alex said, and hopefully not the last. Now, I've written all of my books, including this one, at the cabin overlooking the West Bay. Very inspirational place. Okay, so with those indulgent personal remarks, let's turn to the topic of the evening, U.S.-China relations. Well, I think I should start with the most important point to make, which is that China is the most important country in the world for the United States going forward at present. So this book tries to unpack the history and development of U.S.-China relations, and try and dig into some of the patterns and trends of the relationship over time. One cannot parachute in the year 2025 into the subject of the U.S.-China relations without a pretty good understanding of the history of that relationship. So this is a book I've been wanting to write for a while, but finally, because I had a sabbatical last year from my university, I decided, okay, this is the time to sit down and start to write it. And like all my books, I didn't quite know where I was going to come out when I went into it. I had some hunches, hypotheses, if you will, and puzzles. I've always been interested in sort of puzzles, and this book addresses 2 principal puzzles, one more historical, one more contemporary. So first, in my years of studying and teaching U.S.-China relations, which I do every year, I have an annual graduate seminar, I've grappled with the deep underlying drivers of this fluctuant relationship over time, and what has caused the fluctuation. If there is one true characteristic of U.S.-China relations over time, it's fluctuation. It's anything but constancy. The question is why? Why can't these 2 countries just find a kind of modus operandi sort of equilibrium and get along with each other. So we have had a very fluctuating relationship with China going back more than 2 centuries, folks, not decades, centuries, the 1800s. The question is the causes of the fluctuation from amity, you might say, to enmity, back to enmity, sort of having a harmonious relationship to a hostile relationship, back and forth, back and forth. What a recently deceased colleague of mine, great historian Warren Cohen, who spent his career teaching at Michigan State, he characterized this as the love-hate cycle in US-China relations. So that's the historical puzzle that animated this book. I wanted to dig into this relationship over 2 centuries and find out what causes this. The second, more contemporary puzzle is why, after 4 decades of the American so-called engagement policy of and strategy towards China, why, this is a long 4-decade period, beginning with Richard Nixon's historic visit to China in 1972. And since that time, the 2 governments and the 2 societies have become deeply entwined with each other. Bilateral cooperation was predominantly the norm, despite occasional frictions and crises, such as the Tiananmen massacre. Nonetheless, it was essentially a cooperative period of 4 decades. But then, over the last decade, why has the relationship given way to comprehensive competition, where frictions and systemic disengagement have become the overriding character of the relationship? So that was the more contemporary puzzle that animated the study. And how is it that China's previously positive image amongst Americans, the American public, has taken a nosedive since 2012? You can see here for yourself the Pew Research Center's data, whereby today 82%, I think it is, 83% of the American public have a, quote, unfavorable view of China. Moreover, 42% view China as an enemy. That's a strong word, enemy. 42% of Americans consider China an enemy. 50% consider China a competitor. And only 6% see China as a partner. So those are the 3 choices that the Pew Research Center gave the people surveyed. You have choice, enemy, competitor, partner. This is the data, folks, today, or end of 2024. So the answer to these 2 puzzles, and the basic argument of the book, is that over 4 decades, from the 1980s through the 2010s, China won over America through its generally reformist domestic policies and its foreign policies, which, importantly, coincided with America's expectations of China and America's national interests. So the congruence, if you will, China's behavior, American expectations, produced essentially that 4-decade-long cooperative relationship. Excuse me. So you might say that America's expectations of China were the independent variable, or are the independent variable. China's behavior is the dependent variable in trying to explain the fluctuation, okay? Now, I'll say more in a moment about what these American expectations were, but in short, as I say, when China's behavior conformed with America's expectations, the 2 could cooperate and generally had non-conflictual relations. But when China did not conform to American expectations, frictions followed. Now, to be sure, China also had its expectations of America during this period, with which the Chinese side was not satisfied. So there is, you might say, an expectation gap in the relationship. That may be actually the real source of the fluctuation and the problems. Both sides have expectations, perhaps unrealistic expectations. And then the other side lets down the other side, and that's a cause for friction. Okay, moreover, I've ironically found in the research, this is why I say I don't always know where I'm going to come out when I start writing a book. This book looks principally at the American side of the relationship, American policy towards China. I went back through, I'll go back to the 1800s, but I really look pretty carefully at the post-World War II period, all the American administrations, and I found that, ironically or counterintuitively, the deeper the engagement and the presence of each country in the other, the deeper the suspicions and the greater the frictions emerged. Now, this is counterintuitive, as I say, because engagement was premised on the liberal assumption that the deeper and broader each side's presence in and ties with the other, the greater the cooperation and the stronger the relationship would be. This is sort of international relations 101. Interact with the other, you'll get along with the other. Well, interestingly, I find in the book, that was the case for about 3+ decades, but beginning in the 2010s, it changed. And a wide variety beginning around 2010. In fact, I was living in China that year as a senior Fulbright scholar, and I experienced it personally. A wide variety of American actors began to encounter considerably increased obstacles to their work in China, work they'd been doing for 3 decades. American NGOs, non-governmental organizations, journalists, American businesses and companies, American foundations, American universities, American educational exchange organizations, the US Embassy and its consulates, and a variety of other American actors all began to encounter increased impediments and obstacles put up by the Chinese government to their normal work in the country. Work that the Chinese government had not only tolerated, but even welcomed from the 80s onwards. So then in 2012, the current Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, came to power. And over the last 13 years, these trends and obstacles have only dramatically increased domestically and externally. China's behavior externally has become much more what China specialists refer to as assertiveness, if not aggression, in East Asia in particular, but other parts of the planet. So, and moreover, China has stepped up its own so-called influence and interference activities in this country over the last decade, which has begun to negatively impact American society and laws, American states and municipalities, universities, civil society, media, and national security. So I say stepped up because such influence and interference activities on the part of the Chinese in our country have long been present. This is not a new phenomenon, but they have radically increased since the 2010s. And since then, China's intelligence, media, and what are known as their United Front organs have all expanded their presence and malign activities inside the United States. So as a result, the American government has securitized, I should say, also securitized the relationship. The Chinese put up their own obstacles to American actors in China, so China securitized the relationship. Chinese, that's anquanhua. The American side has been doing the same thing, so you have this sort of dynamic, securitization dynamic between both sides, because both sides use the other as subversive to their own interests inside of their countries, not to say outside of their borders. So so over the past decade, I argue in the book, and hence the subtitle, China has progressively lost America. 3 decades of engagement, it won over America. Well, it has squandered its gains through its own behavior. And as a result, the different constituencies inside the United States, what I call the engagement coalition, has crumbled. You know, the beauty of the engagement policy was, in some ways, its elasticity. There was something in it for everyone in America, every constituency. Localities like Traverse City could buy into it. You know, companies, universities, everybody except industrial workers in the upper Midwest, you know, had a stake in engagement with China, a positive stake. Well, over the last decade or so, that coalition has crumbled. And in American foreign policy, in any sphere, to have a successful foreign policy, you must have strong domestic support for it. You can't have a policy coming out of the White House that the American public doesn't support. So there was a disjuncture at the end of the Obama administration. The Obama administration practiced engagement for the first term, and then the second term not. But the American public was going in this direction, where the graphs I just showed you are. Well, the administration was clinging to engagement. Anyway, that all snapped around 2017, to be precise, when the first Trump administration came to office. Now, you might ask, what was the strategy of engagement? And what were the policies of engagement intended to achieve? You might ask, well, very brief summary. You're gonna have to, I hate to say it, you're gonna have to buy the book. You know, Christmas is not that far away, folks. It makes a great gift for your loved ones, but I'm just joking. But so I argue that the U.S. engagement strategy of China had these four elements: to modernize China economically and technologically, or help, I should say, to help China modernize itself. And let's make no mistake here. The United States did not modernize the China of today. The Chinese people modernized their own country, to their great credit, but with substantial assistance and investment and inputs from a variety of countries, not just America, European countries, Asian countries, and so on, but help China modernize economically, technologically. Secondly, liberalize China politically and socially. Notice, please, I did not say democratize, I said liberalize. Liberalization is a step on the path to democratization, but a lot of people argue America's been trying to democratize China over the years. Nonsense. I don't know a single serious American that's been trying to do that. But liberalize China, absolutely. Third, to integrate and socialize China into the international order, post-World War II order, the global liberal order it's referred to. And then fourthly, to exchange people in multiple professions between our two societies, what I call engagement as process. So, just to repeat, to modernize, liberalize, and socialize China and exchange with it. And exchanges were a mechanism to advance the first three goals. Okay? Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into these, but I'm going to put them up on the screen. These are what I call the 7 tactics. So if there are 4 goals of engagement, there are 7 tactics. You'll just have to absorb those for yourself. The book goes into them in some detail, but for the sake of time, I'll just let you sort of take that in. But taken together, these are the core elements of the American engagement strategy towards China. There is no master document sitting in the National Archives in Washington that lays out the engagement strategy, but I've been studying it over many administrations since the Carter administration that I worked in. I was, you might say, I was present at the creation of the normalization of relations between the US and China. I was on the South Lawn of the White House the day that Deng Xiaoping came to initiate US-China diplomatic relations. I met Deng 3 times on that visit, shook hands with him. He came up about here on me. He's only 4'11". But I worked on the China policy of the US government in 77, 78. So anyway, those have been the goals over time. But there's always been this tension, and it's become more apparent over the last decade between what I call the American liberalism running into Chinese Leninism. The two that tension's always been there ever since the 1950s. John Foster Dulles gave his famous speech about advancing so-called peaceful evolution in communist societies. The key to containment of the Soviet Union and the other societies the Soviet Union dominated, which included China during the 1950s, was to undermine those regimes from within, Dulles argued. That was supposed to be the policy of peacefully evolving these societies towards more liberal futures. Okay, well, that wasn't lost on Mao Zedong or the Chinese Communist Party. They have assumed since the 1950s that is exactly what the United States has been trying to do. So they've had fears of subversion for decades. Our fears of their subversion is much more recent. Okay, but to fully understand the rise and fall of the engagement strategy really requires, I think, recognizing the long-standing and deeply embedded paternalistic missionary impulse to mold and shape China that lies at the core of the American approach to China over several centuries. Indeed, American attempts to shape, mold, and change China far predate President Nixon's 1972 visit. They go back, as I say, to the 1800s. And here you have photographs, I think, of the first two emissaries to China, first two American emissaries. On the left, Anson Burlingame, who was succeeded by a man named J. Ross Brown. Both Burlingame and Brown sought to move the Qing dynasty leaders at that time in more modern and liberal directions. But interestingly, they also epitomized very different approaches, almost radically opposite alternative approaches to changing and shaping China in more modern and liberal directions. So shape China in more modern and liberal directions. That's been the consistency. How to do it has been debated over time. So Burlingame, interestingly, he called it the cooperative policy of patient paternalism, to work with Chinese reformers in a cooperative fashion. The Burlingame indulged the Chinese, you might say, even learning the language. The Qing court, Qing dynasty leaders, liked him so much that they designated him the representative of all foreigners in China. European, well, there weren't that many, but mainly European. He said, we like you, Burlingame. You can represent France, Britain, Germany, all. We love you. You want to be like us. You understand our problems. So that was one approach, the cooperative approach. By contrast, Brown was condescending, advocated tough diplomatic pressure, moral condemnation, racism, and the threat of force. So you have here in these first two American ambassadors to China, polar opposite approaches. One to indulge China, the other to coerce China. Okay, well, why do I raise this? Because I think the American approach to China has oscillated between those two approaches, indulge versus coerce, ever since. But the goal has been consistent, to change China. This is in America's DNA. Okay, so even going back during the Cold War to the Kennedy, Eisenhower, Johnson period, let me just show this to you. This is President Kennedy's last press conference on November 14th, 1963, 8 days prior to his tragic assassination, and what turned out, as I say, to be his last press conference. In response to a journalist's question concerning the possibility of trade with China, you can hopefully read it for yourself. Kennedy suddenly declared to the assembled journalists, we're not planning on trade with Red China, as it was known then, in view of the policies that Red China pursues. But if the Red Chinese indicate a desire to live at peace with the United States and other countries surrounding it, then quite obviously the United States would reappraise its policies. We are not wedded to a policy of hostility to Red China, unquote. Well, this is the height of containment, folks. The President of the United States says this out of the blue. It wasn't just out of the blue, because a number of his advisors, including my former University of Michigan professor and mentor, Alan Whiting, were working on the president to open some sorts of ties to China. Canada had just relaxed its trade embargo because 30 million people had just died of famine in China because of Mao Zedong's crazy Great Leap Forward policies. So Canada began to export wheat to the Chinese. So there was a kind of bubbling up inside the Kennedy administration, but also out in the country, interestingly. This is something I didn't expect to find when I started researching this book. Really interesting in this section of the book. The Quaker American Friends Service Committee, the UN Association of the United States, the League of Women Voters, American Chamber of Commerce, and other civic organizations were all beginning to advocate for some sort of opening to China. So when Nixon gets elected, he's pushing on an open door, you might say, domestically. The containment policy was really running its course. But Nixon even, oops, sorry, let me go back. Nixon too wants to change China. 1967, 5 years before he makes his historic trip to Beijing, he says, the world cannot be safe until China changes. Thus, our aim, to the extent that we can influence events, should be to induce change, okay? There you have Kennedy and Nixon. So, with that context and the clock ticking, I may just have to recommend that you get a copy of the book, but let me give you a very brief, you're gonna have to absorb this on your own. This is the chapter outline. I've already discussed basically chapters 1 through 4. Chapter 5 looks at the first Trump and Biden administrations. Then I have 2 parallel chapters, one called Inside the Beltway and the other Outside the Beltway. The Inside the Beltway chapter looks at the US federal government in Washington, particularly executive branch departments, the Congress, and the national security community, which is comprised of the US military, the intelligence community, and the counterintelligence community. So how all of these actors have moved from engagement to countering China. And there is now a new counter-China coalition inside the Beltway, to be sure. So I dig into all those actors. In chapter 6, chapter 7 goes outside the Beltway, into the country, and examines several elements, including the MAGA movement, how those in that movement view China. There's some very interesting data there. It looks, though, specifically at 4 case studies: American NGOs, American universities, the American business community, and American states. Those are all outside the Beltway. How each of those 4 actors, the problems they ran into, they've all been operating in China since the 80s. Well, as I say, beginning in the 2010s, they began to encounter a lot of resistance. And therefore, they too have left the engagement coalition, and many of them have joined the counter-China coalition, business community being the one exception to that. That's basically the outline. Then I get to the last part of the book, and I'll try and fast forward through this so we can get to your questions. There's one chapter, American China policy is by no means settled. It's always been contentious, and there are different schools that are contending with each other. There's a whole chapter about what I call the Great American China Policy Debate, okay? Chapter 7, I think, and I distinguished these 5 different clusters of opinions amongst experts, okay, so to speak, foreign policy specialists. I just can't go into them in detail for the sake of time. I'd be happy to in the Q&A period unpack any of these, but this is how I see the current debate over the last year or 2 as clustering. Well, the first one, basically, a stealthy rival school sees China as having some sort of grand design, grand strategy, grand plan to displace the United States as the world's leading power. Comprehensive competition school is just as it sounds, that we are in competition comprehensively across multiple domains: security, diplomacy, commerce, technology, innovation, higher education, ideology, global governance, and other areas. Re-engagement school is that it sounds. There are those who argue that the United States simply needs to get back to its old engagement strategy, should never have abandoned it in the first place under Trump 1.0, and that the old strategy still serves American interests well, and that they argue China is not an adversary or even a competitor of the United States, and that the US therefore needs to kind of take a deep breath and re-engage, reach out its hand to Beijing and re-engage with the Chinese side. That's school number 3. School number 4, a slight variant of that, those who think that China is only reacting to an assertive and aggressive American actions, okay? It turns this around and say that China's just pursuing its own national interests. They're insecure. It's the Americans who are coming at them, and they are just naturally putting up whatever defenses they can. And this school argues that the American side needs to better understand China's insecurities, not provoke them, not demonize China, but rather to be so-called strategically empathetic, okay? That's school number 4. And last school, managed competition, who believe that and argue that competing with China and protecting American national interests must be pursued, and assertively so. Passive competition is not a strategy. Active competition is, but at the same time, this school argues, we need to establish a number of guardrails, buffers, off-ramps, and dialogue mechanisms to keep the relationship from deteriorating further. You might ask, what is further? The answer is an adversarial relationship in which China becomes a true enemy. China is not yet an adversary or an enemy, even though 45% of Americans think it is. Yet is the key term. But clearly the drift and the trend line here is in that direction. So the managed competition school, which the Biden administration exemplified, and my former classmate, Nicholas Burns, our American ambassador to China, says we have to put boundaries around the competition. Otherwise, it can lead to war. That simple. We don't want a war, folks, with a nuclear power. And in case you didn't read the newspaper yesterday, take a look at what China did on the main boulevard in Beijing yesterday with their weaponry. World-class weaponry. And look who was observing that display. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un. It tells you a lot. Okay, so then I have in the last chapter my own suggestions, recommendations for what I call an assertive competition policy. There's an appendix to the book, which you may or may not well, it is interesting because it flips the script. It looks at the Chinese side. How do the Chinese understand what Chinese? China's America watchers. There are America specialists in China, and I wrote my PhD dissertation out here in the West Bay for the University of Michigan on China's America specialists 30 some odd years ago. So I've been studying their views of America my entire career. And they haven't understood America very well for those 30 years, and they still don't. They completely missed this change from engagement to disengagement that I've been describing you tonight. There's a massive intelligence failure on their side. So I dig in the appendix, I dig into their writings, and so that's the book. Let me just conclude. I wish I could be more positive and upbeat about the state of US-China relations, but ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, this is the reality today, and it will be the reality for the indefinite future. I have, in fact, an acronym I've coined, which doesn't make for a very easily said thing. It's called ICR, Indefinite Comprehensive Competitive Rivalry, ICCR. That's how I see the United States-China relationship. It is comprehensively competitive across all dimensions. security, diplomacy, commerce, technology, higher ed, ideology, global governance, etc. And it is a classic great power rivalry where both sides, both countries are contesting each other all around the planet. Latin America, Middle East, Africa, the Arctic, the Antarctic, cyberspace, everywhere. It's the US and China, folks. So this is a classic great power rivalry, much more dangerous, in fact, than the Soviet-American rivalry. So, and it's going to go on indefinitely. So I wish I could be more upbeat, but that's reality, and that's America's challenge, is to compete effectively and intelligently to manage this competition and advance our own national interests. So Alex, I'm sorry I've run a little bit over time, but I will call a halt to it there and look forward to your questions and a discussion. Thank you very much.
This over for you?
Please.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Shambaugh. I felt that the organization of the book is very elegant, and there's so much nuance to this that I think it's essential reading that we pick up. I also want to say that you intersperse a lot of personal stories in the book as well. So it's a very compelling read, and I appreciate that talk. Let's move to the questions from all of you. We will start with one from the old art building, and there are 44 people at the old art building this evening, so that counts as, yeah. It looks like one online viewer, but it's 44 people. So the question is the growth of the middle class driving policy in China as awareness of the conditions of middle class in the West increases? Is the growth of the middle class driving policy in China as awareness of the conditions of the middle class in the West increases?
Well, it's funny you should mention that there are a variety of anecdotes in the book, because I have lived the U.S.-China relationship for the last 40 plus years. I was in the first group of American students to go to China, I should say in the first year that American students could go to China in 1979. I've been going there for 35 years continuously, worked in the U.S. government at the time of normalization and various things. So I intersperse different chapters with things I experienced, and here I'm going to tease the audience with one I've only made public in the book for the first time. Maybe it'll incentivize you to go get a copy, but I might have saved President Reagan from an assassination attempt in China, which real evidence for obviously didn't happen. Thank God I could not have lived with myself if it had, but I overheard a plot. I made that plot known to the American embassy in Beijing, and the plot was thwarted, let's say. Interestingly, the U.S. embassy personnel have subsequently told me they had another active threat from Iranians in China during that visit too. But anyway, I put myself into different chapters where it's relevant. This is not a biography, but I have lived the relationship, so I put myself in. But this is a very interesting question about the middle class in the West and the various issues that we all wrestle with. I think the short answer is yes, they are aware. From reading the literature in Chinese by their America watchers, actually, and their sociologists, not just of the United States, but of Western Europe. They've studied, for example, very carefully the European social welfare state and social democratic models. They've looked this is one thing China's just brilliant at. They are hardly living in a cocoon. They very constantly study other societies and governments and looking for best practices and things to avoid. They're really good at this. And so they've understood a lot of the problems the middle classes in Europe and in this country and Latin America and so-called other newly industrializing societies in East Asia and Latin America have experienced. and they're anticipating them, and they're trying to preempt a number of them through proactive government action, environmental action, different legal actions. The welfare state, so to speak, in China is not very well developed, but they've been trying to pour more resources into it over the last decade. May surprise you, for a socialist country, they did not have a well-developed welfare system, no pension system, et cetera, et cetera. But over the last, going back to the Hu Jintao period, 2008-10, they began to get very serious because of the demographics. You know, China is in demographic decline. The replacement rate is not being met, and their retirement cohort is larger than the amount of people entering the workforce each year. So they've got a lot of their own problems, but I wouldn't say they're on top of them, but they're aware of them. And they study how the problems that have happened in other societies have manifested. Good question.
Thank you. Yes, thank you to the old art building there. Question from our audience here from Pam. Literally thousands of Chinese students, most the children of the elite there, have studied at both the undergraduate and graduate levels in the US over the past 15 years or so. Many of them are bound to be leaders in China eventually. Will their experience here make a positive difference in the bilateral relationship someday?
Great question, Pam. That was one of the assumptions. In fact, it was one of my 7 tactics of engagement: educate Chinese students in the United States, not just so they can learn engineering and science and technology and whatever they come here to study, but so that they become agents of change back in their own society. That was the assumption. They would come here, they would experience American democracy, open media, everything about our societies, our communities, and go back, and that would have some influence on, because they would become leaders, not necessarily national leaders, but local leaders, you bet, throughout the country. And a number of American universities had programs for these rising leaders, my own included. And today there are 365,000 Chinese students in American universities. Last academic year, we don't have the data yet for this one that's just begun. But unfortunately, there are only 800 American students in China. 365,000, 800. Big asymmetry, folks. 15 years ago, how many American students in China? Answer, 20,000. It's gone from 20,000 down to 800. There are various reasons for that. Not a good trend. We've got to get more Americans to China, but there are real problems involved with that, security problems in particular. But nonetheless, the question has to do with Chinese returned students. Millions, tens of millions have studied abroad in the West, gone back. Have they been the agents of liberal change that the engagement policy advocated? Answer, no, they have not. The Communist Party is so strong that it's like you flick a switch on these people. You talk to them outside of China. I have these students in my classroom. They have respect for our civic and democratic values. Many of them want to emulate them. As soon as they get off the airplane and get home, boom, the switch is flicked again. And the communist nationalism kicks in. So over time, there are those who argue engagement just hasn't worked because it hasn't had time to work yet. And there are, believe me, some of my colleagues say, give it another decade or two, and it'll work, because this generation educated abroad are going to be the engines of political change in China. Good luck.
It's honorable to have patience like that, right? Yeah. Another question here from this audience, from Andrew. This one, it's put in a very straightforward way, but I think it's a deep question. Why is the U.S.-China rivalry more dangerous than the U.S.-Russia rivalry was?
Was or is?
This one said was.
So he means the Soviet Union, not Russia. Well, that rivalry, those of us who lived through it, was extremely threatening and serious to the United States. I would first point out the rivalry with Russia today, with Putin's Russia, is up there right under the rivalry with China. And the reason is, the answer to his good question is because Russia is not a comprehensively strong state. It is a failed state, not failing, it has failed, except in certain military areas. So Russia today is not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was hardly a successful state. It collapsed precisely for the reasons because it was not comprehensively capable. And the Chinese have studied this very carefully. One of my previous books looked in depth at the Chinese study of the causes of collapse of the Soviet Union. They did microscopic analysis, and they determined that, amongst other things, the Soviet Union invested excessively, 48% of their GDP in military defense. Half of their GDP went to the Soviet military, to the neglect of citizens of the country. So the Chinese said, we're not going to make that mistake. How much do they invest? 3.5% today, folks. Well, they've got the world's second largest defense budget. It's $280 billion, but it's only 3.5% of GDP. So anyway, long story short, good question. The Soviet Union and Russia today are not comprehensive powers. That's why my China Goes Global book was subtitled The Partial Power. Today, China is not a partial power. That book was 11 years ago. Last decade has made a lot of difference. This is a comprehensive power across all domains, and in some domains, tech domains, in advance of the United States.
Thank you. So this question, I think, gets to something that we've had several questions come in on tariff policy. So let me just fold them all right into this one. This is from Amy. Historically, empires have fallen after wars. In today's globally connected economy, is a traditional war still a possibility, or will we see U.S.-China supremacy decided mainly through economic battles?
Well, again, very good and complicated question. In fact, Alex knows, because he was there just before tonight's session, I was meeting with a number of Northwestern Michigan College students and some high school students, I believe. This question came up. And Amy is correct. Most great power rivalries have resulted in war. There's a very careful study done by Harvard professor Graham Allison. The book is called Destined for War. And he looked at 14 cases of rising powers challenging established powers, number one versus number two. 12 of the 14, and you can debate one of the cases, so really 12 of the 13 resulted in war, either because the established power felt threatened, insecure, and took preemptive action against the rising power, or the rising power felt insecure or saw an opportunity and took aggressive action against the rising or established power, right? But 12 out of 13 cases resulted in war. So this is what these are the stakes here in the US-China relationship historically, and that's why we have to manage the competition. War, look, if we didn't have a Taiwan issue in the US-China relationship, I would be more relaxed about this subject. But we have I don't want to use that adjective, explosive, but we have a time bomb that has been ticking for over 50 years, since 1949. Actually, it's embedded, goes back before 49, because the Taiwan problem, I'll make one very important statement, is embedded in the Chinese Civil War between the communists and the nationalists. So everything that's happened since 49 is a continuation of the Chinese Civil War. All right, but the bomb, if you will, for that metaphor, maybe the wrong one, has been ticking, and it's still ticking. And the mainland is really running out of patience, you might say. You've seen the coercive military exercises in the last 2 years. This is a very, very, very dangerous situation in Taiwan, South China Sea. So let's hope that this is not case number 14, okay? Let's hope that the US-China case joins the US-Britain case. You may wonder, what was the one time when war did not erupt? It was between Britain and the US at the end of the 19th century, when the British basically said, okay, you Americans, the Western Hemisphere is yours. You claim manifest destiny. We have other more important interests in the Middle East, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in India. We can't manage the whole world. Over to you. You can have the Western Hemisphere as your sphere of influence. We are going elsewhere. Well, the analogy today is, some people argue this, that we, the Americans, are a Pacific power, have been since Theodore Roosevelt. We should just cede the Western Pacific and Asia to China, because that's their neighborhood. Well, sorry, Theodore Roosevelt wouldn't agree with that, and no American leader or strategist ever since would agree with that. So Americans not going to just pull out of East Asia, as far as I know. Although you never know. So it's a valid question, because those are the stakes, war and peace. We have to get this relationship right. But what is right? Right is just managing the complexity. It's very hard for Americans. We are not complex thinkers. We have a hard time walking and chewing gum at the same time. Things are black or white. Well, we've got to learn to be a little more complex in our strategies and our thinking.
Thank you. This next question is from online. It's from a mutual friend, Karen. And Karen asks, the New York Times is reporting that Trump will announce tomorrow that the U.S. Defense Department will now be known as the War Department. How will China view this?
I don't mean to be flippant, but China would say, what took you so long? No, I am being flippant. I've read reports of this intention by President Trump to rename the Department of Defense the Department of War. I promised myself I'm not going to talk about the Trump administration tonight with regards to China or anything else, but let's wait till this happens, if it does happen. And Karen, hi Karen. Last few times I spoke here, it was because of Karen and her husband Jack's kind invitation. It's a symbolic thing. It's like the Gulf of America, right? Has that really caught on?
Yeah. So, so you're hoping it's what's in a name kind of a thing. I hope so too. Okay, I think this has to be the last question. It's kind of a big one, and I'm thinking of what some of us must have read about a huge cyber espionage finding and study called Salt Typhoon. Great name. The question comes from Tim. How much does China's gigantic secret service, estimated as 5 to 10 times larger than the CIA, affect China-U.S. relations? Does this give weight to the stealthy rival school of thought?
Oh, goodness. Well, the first thing to say is that China's cyber threats to the United States, and that is the correct term, threats, are off the charts. They are by far the greatest danger to American government departments, to American infrastructure, dams, ports, other public infrastructure, companies, universities. So the cyber problem is very serious, and I've got a section in the book on that. But it's symptomatic of the broader espionage question. And China is the most assertive espionage threat to the United States by far, much more than Russia. The FBI director, former director Wray, says that the FBI opens a China case every hour. It has about 6,000, I think he said last year, active cases. There was an incident here in the region, I was told yesterday, of a Chinese student from Michigan State who was caught trying to sneak onto a local military base. I don't know if it was Camp Grayling or Alpena or where, but this is not an isolated case. There have been many Chinese caught trying to sneak onto American military bases, and there are real reasons why they're interested in Camp Grayling, which I will not go into here publicly. But Chinese espionage, folks, is real, and therefore our counterintelligence has to be up to the scale that this person's question had to do with scale. The Ministry of State Security in China is massive, and they have all kinds of different actors, intelligence actors, cyber actors, just as we have 13 intelligence agencies in this country. But they are coming at us full bore, and therefore our domestic counterintelligence, FBI in particular, but others, all of us, it's up to local officials, mayors, It's up to governors, it's up to university administrators to be aware of the different espionage threats to our country. I don't want to overblow it because by far the majority of Chinese students in America are not espionage agents undercover. They're here to learn what they can learn and to get their degrees and go home. But there are some who are doing things they shouldn't be doing.
Well, it's always lamentable when we get to this point of the discussion because we have reached our time. I want to thank Professor Shambaugh for all his remarks, and I will give you, I'll hand it back over to you for some closing remarks as well. Before that, we extend a continued thank you to all of our supporting members here, our business community members, our volunteers from the IF Advisory Board, our student leadership team, the NMC Foundation, the team up in the booth here from the Dennos Museum Center, and our satellite partners in Leland and Rogers City. All of you help make this community asset thrive so we can continue to be educated on global affairs from great experts like Dr. Shambaugh right here in northern Michigan. And a quick preview of what's up next. October 8th, you can join us downtown at the State Theater for a community night documentary screening with an in-person speaker from the UK, Madhvi Dalal, on life-changing public health initiatives for girls and women in East Africa. That event is presented in partnership with Uplift Travel, NMC, International Services and Service Learning, the State Theater, and IAF. And tickets are required for that one. NMC students are free. That's October 8th at the State Theater. October 16th, again, the inaugural IAF Gala at the Haggerty Center. Very special evening with former Congressman, veteran, business leader Peter Meyer. And you can reserve your tickets or sponsor a table at tciaf.com or scan that very quickly before it goes away. Look under events, and of course, we'll send you a note about that in email. Next one is October 23rd, back here in Milliken Auditorium for a discussion on global order and international institutions with Christopher Prabel of the Stimson Center. That program is part of World Affairs Councils of America Engage America series in partnership with the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. So that's enough for the moment. There's more coming in November as well. There's more online to check out, so take a look. You can check out these events, grab tickets, make your membership gift for the season if you're so inclined. And now I will turn it over to you, Dr. Shambaugh, for any final words, and thank you again for engaging with us this evening.
Well, thank you. I don't have much more to say, except thank you, Alex, and to IAF, and in all sincerity to everybody who took the time to come out tonight and those online. I really appreciate it, and I mean that there's nothing that means more to me than speaking at one's home, right? Even though I was raised in Illinois, I've been coming here for more than 70 years, and I'll continue to come. So this is not only where I do creative work, but bond with my relatives every summer. And I hope to run into some of you, at Barden's Wonder Freeze, or on Front Street, or Sledder's Tavern, wherever. Please, if you see me, walk up and say hi. Wish you all well, and I just want to, again, note how important the work that IAF does here in the community is. So keep it up, Alex.
Thank you, Dr. Shambaugh. Thank you all. See you next month. Thank you.